Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first ever TCM educational series talking about the traditional Chinese medicine. I'll be your host, instructor Neil here. In today, we're going to be talking about this first ever part or the building stone of the traditional Chinese medicine, which is the traditional Chinese medicine foundation. And of course, today's video will be the very first, of the many episodes for this entire topic. Okay. And of course, just a little bit about me or a little bit about myself for those audiences who, have no idea who I am. My name is Neil, and of course, my last name is Doe, full name Neil Doe, and I'm a registered acupuncturist, a registered TCM professional practicing in Vancouver, British Columbia, and of course, that is located in the beautiful west coast of Canada. The reason why I'm doing this video, of course, is to share the knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine. And of course, it is also for my current, past, and of course, potential future students who wish to get a deeper understanding about traditional Chinese medicine, because the program I'm currently teaching in college is not offering, enough details or enough depths for my students. So doesn't matter who or which group you belong to, welcome. And of course, welcome to my first ever, educational series regarding with TCM. Okay. Now, just let me move my head a little bit to the right side. And of course, let's get started. So in this lecture, we're going to talk about the very first aspect or the very beginning of the traditional Chinese medicine, which, leads us to what is TCM or what is traditional Chinese medicine, right? It is essentially a type of medicine that has over 1,000 years or has over thousands of years of history. And of course, it's been practicing and of course, still currently practicing in China and of course, and it's spreading worldwide. It's pretty well widely recognized by the United States, European medical system, and also the Canadian government, right? So, this kind of medicine, it belongs to the traditional stream. So in the modern days, we're meeting some challenges. And of course, a lot of people who, have no idea about what is TCM or traditional Chinese medicine. It is still developing these days from the, traditional root or the traditional history or traditional bloodline, and of course trying to merge what's going on today, trying to merge itself, and of course trying to supplement and of course combine or work together into the mainstream allopathic medicine, okay, which is the Western medicine, what we call these days, for including surgery, operation, pharmaceuticals, all these kind of things, okay. It is a very big component and of course lies deeply in the root of the Chinese culture, okay? And also, it is widely recognized and, of course, practiced in the greater Chinese cultural sphere, which, aka, or as known as the East Asian community. Okay, East Asian community, including but not limited to Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, those kind of places, and even some part of the Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and of course, all these things. Okay, some of these traditional Chinese medicine products or modalities or even tools are widely, practiced and recognized in the world, like the very famous tiger balm, right? That is actually a part of the traditional Chinese medicine being recognized by the, entire human or civilization on Earth to prove it has very good usage to improve people's quality of life. Now, as what we are discussing, one thing we should be very clear is that traditional Chinese medicine arises from traditional Chinese culture and, common beliefs of folks, right? And of course, it includes, but not, of course, not limited to the problem solving and, of course, critical thinking process. So with this being said, I want to engage some critical thinking for my audiences and, of course, for my students. What would be the differences you can think between the Asian or the traditional Chinese groups or community or even, culture with a current, very popular, North America or even European, like Western beliefs or Western values. you're able to think the first thing, of course, China or East Asian cultures are very collective. They emphasize on, the harmony of the entire society instead of like focusing on individual benefits or individualism, right? And of course, because of these kind of different mindsets or the different ways for, different part of the world, they also vary or manifest in the different styles of problem solving or critical thinking process. So the reason why I'm bringing this up or trying to mention this in the slides or in the lecture is because I want to then to know or set up a prerequisite or a standard before we actually talk about what is TCM or the concept in TCM is that this is a completely different system and a completely different modality or medicine you're going to be learning from or from me or from your textbook or from these videos. Okay, and of course you'll have to throw away all the pre-existing values or trying to inherit or adapt into this very own system of traditional Chinese medicine. Okay, so what is so special about traditional medicine or traditional Chinese medicine especially? And of course, how come it can, grow worldwide popular? And of course, so many people are, using that. What's so special, right? So it focuses on individual instead of the manifestation. Okay, as what we are mentioning, Western culture or Western values focus a lot on individualism instead of the harmony or the collective interest. For traditional Chinese medicine, the philosophy or the practice style is actually opposite. We focus on individual. We talk about people. We talk about you as a patient, as an organic whole, right? Instead, we're just, you have headache, here you go, here is some medication for headache. We're talking about how we can help you as a person, as a, complete, wholesome being, instead of, okay, you are just a, a candidate, a participant, or a patient, an individual with these symptoms. We're targeting the symptoms or the manifestation, right? So that would be the main key differences between the allopathic or Western medicine and also traditional Chinese medicine. And now it also focused heavily, a lot heavier than most of the Western doctors or Western values on lifestyle and diet. Okay, you're able to see that the concepts or even perspectives or even like bits of the traditional Chinese medicine knowledge is being applied on a daily basis in a lot of things throughout, pan Asia or pan, Sino or Chinese cultural sphere, okay? Including but not limited to, for the examples I've listed in the slides, Cantonese soup, right? If you share a Cantonese or a Hakka background, you're gonna see or grew up with a lot of the things in the family, like mom cooking, weird stuff or weird herbs or weird fruits in the soup, and of course, sort of like making a decoction or magic potion, right? And oftentimes you would ask your mom or your family member, say like, hey, why are we drinking this? Or why are we, having this as dinner, right? And they would say, oh, this is good for what? And that is good for what? And this is very good in maybe tonifying your qi, right? Getting rid of your fatigue. And of course, basically every Chinese know after, big event of life like surgery, operation, or very heavy exercise, you are supposed to drink like chicken stock or chicken soup, right? To replenish your energy. That is kind of the philosophy taken from this traditional Chinese medicine. We focus heavily on diet and lifestyle. And of course, just to demystify the stereotypes or the stereotypical expression about the Chinese group or East Asian group, the reason why we are thought as, barbarians or even like say stereotypes with us like eating weird stuff is because also the knowledge from traditional Chinese medicine we are saying certain parts or certain things could have a great result on treating certain symptoms of the body. So that is a very primordial or very primitive way of, recognizing all these kind of like different ingredients or different substances. Okay, medicine and also philosophy of life. Okay, for this traditional Chinese medicine, it has its root very strongly embedded in the yin and yang theory or yin and yang philosophy, the dualism, right? Like there's two things, right? There's always a good side, always a bad side, right? And also the different elements, the five phases or the five elements, as what you might hear from, not really from the Avatar, the cartoon, but other like social media or even like say medias or even literatures, right? You oftentimes hear this, what are the five elements? Metal, fire, water, wood, and earth, right? All these kind of like five elements or five elementals, right? And of course, you're going to be learning this in detail with me in these educational series or videos. Now, just an overview of this course or this educational series of TCM Foundation, okay? We're going to be talking about basic principles of TCM and philosophy, which is going to happen in this class or in this video you are watching. And of course, next video, we're going to be talking about yin and yang and also five elements. After that, we're going to be talking about zang, xiang, okay? It is a pinyin from the, character translation. Zang means visceral or organ. Xiang means the interpretation to it. So as known as or as translated as organ functions. Okay. And of course, you are seeing in the next video after that, going to be qi, blood, fluids. Okay. And of course, the QI is pronounced as qi or CHI, qi. Okay. AKA or as known as or different translations depends on the literature resource you are, looking at or where it's from. You can have the variations of CHI, chi, or KI, ki, or chi, right? And of course, you have this QI, chi, right? So they all mean the same thing. And then after that, we're going to be talking about the meridians, or as known as the acupuncture acupoint meridians. That is a thing you're oftentimes seeing like social media, in movies, in literature, saying people use needle to poke certain part of the body, and suddenly the person who got needled is very energetic, like stimulated, very weird things happening to their body, and of course suddenly their disease is cured. Yes, we're going to be talking about that in detail when we're in that series of video. Okay. After that, we're going to be talking about the pathogenic factors or the reasons why people get sick from, environment, from whatever reason. Okay. After that, going to be the etiology, which is very brief. Etiology includes, or it actually means the reason why you're getting sick. Or etiology in here should be also including the pathogenesis as a medical term for describing the developing process or procedures, the entire process of why people getting sick, right? For example, you are wearing, not enough layers, you caught a cold, right, during flu season, and then the first you'll feel like a little bit chill, right? And then you'll feel a little bit, cold, and your nose becomes stuffy. After that, after a couple of days, you'll headache, and of course, fever sensation, body temperature is increasing, and then of course you are sick, right? We're going to be talking about that or looking into the etiology and the pathogenesis in detail, okay? And of course, after that, there are going to be another video to summarize everything and of course to catch up some of the miscellaneous and other information on disease prevention and also the treatment principles, okay? This is just a very brief video for this entire series on TCM Foundation. Okay? Now, to describe traditional Chinese medicine, we have to look at its principles. Okay? The first thing it heavily focuses on especially in modern days, we have to, go from the empirical scientific interpretation. We have to look at traditional Chinese medicine in the more materialistic or material world, right? So this medicine is actually built upon the materialism of, life philosophy. It is a kind of science researching, okay? It's actually a scientific thinking process or scientific thinking procedure. Doing research, actual research on human physiology, pathology, and diseases, diagnosis, treatment, and prevention or preventional procedures. Okay. And some people may argue, hey, Neil, I Googled, right? Traditional Chinese medicine is actually pseudoscience. It's not science. Actually, not quite. Okay. Pseudoscience does not equal to fake science. Okay. Pseudoscience just means it is not a part of the modern empirical scientific thinking or processing patterns, does not fall into that category. Instead, pseudoscience means what? Pseudoscience means this is knowledge from people's experiences. Okay, and we all know that China has a long history of civilization. Of course, this traditional Chinese method or traditional Chinese method of healing or medicinal, modalities dates back a long way, right? So that is why this traditional Chinese medicine is widely accepted, because not only for its experience, but also for its long time of practice or practical knowledge. Okay? So the first theory about this, or the principle of traditional Chinese medicine, is materialism. It believes, okay, the first ever thing is there's no ghost, there's no God or nothing, okay? There's no magic or mystery or mystical beings, okay? The world is materialistic. It is made from actual matter, made from actual material. It is a result of the interaction of the yin and yang, okay? And of course, as I mentioned in the course overview or the lecture or educational series overview, we're going to be talking about yin and yang in the next video, okay? And now qi, or aka qi or qi, is a basic unit of life. You can think it as the atom or the very fundamental unit for traditional Chinese medicine. Everything, the smallest unit of life, is going to be the qi. Okay? It is a material foundation of maintaining life activities. When we move, when I talk, when I open my eyes to see stuff, when I draw my finger on the, mouse pad of this laptop, when I talk, when I make voice, it is all the result of the interaction of yin and yang. Okay, qi and the energy shift that comes along with it. Okay, the energy generation or consumption process of the movement of qi. It is called the transformation of qi. Okay, qi's transformation is the most important sign of life. That means movement or the shape change or the interaction of qi. Okay, it is very crucial or essential conflicting movement of an organism's internal changes of yin and yang. Okay, so with this conflicting movement between yin and yang, we all know that one is yin, one is yang. They're always fighting. They're always opposite. That's an ancient philosophy of China. You see the Taiji as black and white, fire and water. They're always fighting, right? So Qi's transformation happens during this process of conflicting movement. And of course, because of there are differences, because it is dynamic, the Qi can have the transformational process, and that creates the sign of life. If there's nothing moving, there's no interaction at all between yin and yang, there would be no life at all. Okay? And of course, as you can see, Qi's movement also have directions. Okay? Upward, going up, or downward, going down, entering into something, whether it's your body, your organ, or your mouth, when you're breathing in, right? Breathing in, entering your body, or exiting, okay? Breathing out are the basic movement or basic movement directions of qi, okay? And now the other principle, heavily focusing on the connection between the shape and spirit. It is, of course, literal translation, but the shape actually means the physical body or the physical physique we are having. Spirit, of course, from its name, you're able to tell, it means the external manifestation of human life activities on broader scope. Anything we do, whether the, drinking water, talking, breathing in, breathing out, that would be all coming or can be concluded into this manifestation of human life activities. Because we are moving, we are, doing actions, we are doing life activities that could be classified to this bigger, broader scope of spirit or Shen, S-H-E-N, okay? But of course, on the narrow scope, let me move this away. So on the narrower scope, we can say the spirit actually means the mind or psychological activities. When we think, when we're talking about our conscious, right? When with our critical thinking process, or when we, think a bit, hesitate, and then, processing our brain, that can be classified as a spirit as well. Okay? And of course, a very common or very key concept you have to take note of is going to be the shape as a house of spirit, and the spirit is going to be the dominant or the lord of shape. Okay? That sort of like emphasizes on the connection or the linkage between body and mind. Okay? And of course, from that, you are able to tell traditional Chinese medicine actually focuses pretty heavily on the mind and body connection. Okay? Now, the other principle of traditional Chinese medicine is heavily focusing on the dialectical perspective. Okay? What is dialectical perspective? You have to see things in relation or in relatives. Okay? Traditional Chinese medicine thinks that not only everything shares the same root, from the qi basic or fundamental unit of life, but they are also always changing, okay? The relationship has to change when they change perspectives, okay? Things are interconnected through various different interpretations. Instead of that, they exist individually, okay? Nothing can exist by themselves. You have to, get your position or get your connection in a society, in a civilization, to be called as living, right? To be considered as existing. If you are just, existing by yourself, of course, you are connected to the heaven, to the environment around you, or to the soil, the earth, right? You have to have a linkage to one another thing. Nothing is able to survive by itself. That is the key principle of traditional Chinese medicine, dialectical perspective. Okay? Everything or every movement happening in the world, every interaction is going to be the results from the conflict between yin and yang. And of course, that includes physiological change of the body. Okay? And of course, the changes will influence the mental aspect, while the psychological changes will manifest in the physical body. Okay? Very similar if you are, into allopathic medicine, or into the psychological practices or psychology programs. You are able to find resources or even research paper on this topic. Nothing very, but relatively new concept that people are starting to recognize in modern days. Modern allopathic medicine practices going to be the biopsychosocial model. Okay, when you are treating a patient, when you are describing or interpreting one of the things happening in, one individual's life or in their body. You can't just, simply describe it. Okay, you have headache. Okay, you have like sore throat. That is not that simple. You have to go from a much wider scope of practice that goes through or you applies this model of biopsychosocial. Okay? As its name tells you directly, bio means physiological or biological of our body, actually living body or meat or flesh, any manifestation, any pathological or abnormal changes of the body, and also the psycho aspect, your mind. What are your thinking? How's your stress? What is your, workload? And of course, how often do you sleep? And of course, do you always get nervous very easily, right? These psychological aspect. And also your social aspect. Because why? If you are working in a very stressful environment, you need to work like 12 hours per day without any breaks or without even lunchtime, or you have to work night shifts where nobody talks to you. And of course, you don't see the sun very often, right? All these things will have an impact to your life. And of course, in modern days, allopathic medicine or MD medical doctors are starting to inherit or apply this model to their medicinal or medical practices. Okay? And of course, this has been widely used in the thousands of years of history of this traditional Chinese medicine as we focus on the interconnection between the mind and also the body. Okay? Changes to the body will also influence your mind. Imagine if you are sick, of course, you have no energy to go out to social, to go clubbing, to maybe meet with your friends. You will just want to stay at home, right? And of course, changes your, psychological thinking pattern. And of course, when you are suffering from, stressful events, maybe you need to, finish this project and the deadline is tonight, of course, you would feel a little bit tense and of course nervousness or even thirsty in some cases because it triggers the response or responsive system of your body, right? And of course, now, this dialectical perspective also plays a very important role in traditional Chinese medicine in terms of treatment, not only by interpretation or by diagnosis. We are using or widely adapting this perspective or this view of things when we start talking about the root and branch of the problem. Root and branch means the core reason. Maybe your back pain comes from, working 8 hours per day. Maybe your headache comes from a very stressful event in your, work, or even from your, very, very troublesome colleague or coworker, something like that. That is going to be the root problem, and also the branch, the manifestation of this core root problem. If you change your job, if you change your environment, if you find another job, right? Change your schedule, change your lifestyle, went from like 8 hours of sitting into like maybe oftentimes you get up to stretch, to take a deep breath in, to take a deep breath out, and of course to, leave your very stressful working environment, then of course your problem will be solved. But of course, if you're not able to, then you're showing up the symptoms like headache from the coworker. Whenever I think about Neil, oh my God, that weird instructor of traditional Chinese medicine on YouTube on this video series, right? Is he talking about weird stuff, about traditional Asian or traditional Chinese stuff, and that gives me a headache, right? That is going to be the branch, okay? And of course, when we are talking about the treatment in traditional Chinese medicine, you also need to see the, the current situation of the symptom. Is it acute? Or, for example, you have been suffering like from that, of course, will be classified into the chronic or the slower condition or situation. But of course, if you had an acute lumbar sprain, like you fell down from stairs yesterday, right? And of course, you felt a severe shooting lower back pain. that is, of course, going to be considered as acute. It's very urgent, right? We need to address the symptom immediately. And for that, you have to compare with or link it with some other things, right? Because of what? Because of the dialectical perspective, okay? In the treatment method, of course, we need to follow this dialectical perspective as well, okay? We have to compare and, of course, put this interpretation in relatives or in relation with other things, okay? For this treatment method, we are able to see we are having parallel treatment or promotional or engaging treatment method, or opposite against suppressive or head-to-head treatment method. Okay, if you have a biological background, you can think of it as a body's natural response, as a negative and positive feedback. For those of you who don't have your relative background, then you are able to think that when we get hot, right, what does our body do? It sweats to reduce body temperature, right? When we are hot, we sweat because water evaporates and of course takes away heat from the body, right? Which on the other case, right, when we are thinking about doing something very urgent, when our body like reacts to it, right? It's getting nervous, more nervous and more nervous, more and more nervous, and of course our heart beats faster and faster, right? Pumping more blood when we are exercising, when we are facing stressful events. And that should be a very good interpretation for this parallel in treatment method. You are trying to engage it in the same way, okay? If it's sweating, you want it to sweat more. And of course, if it's hot, having fever, you want the body temperature to rise a little bit more to trigger a response. A very common example for our body's, symptoms would be the mouth ulcers, okay? When it just happened, it is very painful. And of course, we typically don't care, right? Because we don't touch it or you don't lick it inside of our mouth. And of course, with time growing, then this gets more and more severe. Our body triggers a natural responsive system to basically, self-clear the ulcers out. Okay? That's very interesting. And of course, the other dialectical perspective in the treatment of traditional Chinese medicine would be the individualized design. Okay? Every person's treatment is tailored on that individual or to that individual. Okay? So that is the reason why in the previous slide we mentioned traditional Chinese medicine focus on treating the person instead of treating the symptoms. Okay? That's why when you go to the traditional Chinese medicine professional or practitioners, they talk to you. They listen to your problems, and we want to collect as much information as we can to make a complete diagnosis of you. And of course, that is a reason why a lot of people, they say traditional Chinese medicine or TCM or even acupuncture really helps them much more than allopathic medicine, because allopathic medicine or Western medicine actually focus on treating the symptom instead of treating the person. Okay? But of course, as I mentioned, both medical system is trying to integrate together, trying to learn from each other, trying to lead, entire human being or civilization or entire medical system into a better places. That is coming very fast. And of course, we are able to see it coming very soon in the nearby future. Okay? And then the last thing of this dialectical perspective in treatment of TCM going to be the pattern diagnosis and treatment principles. Okay, treatment method and treatment principles can be very different because they're talking about two separate things. Okay, for this dialectical perspective, we need to see what is actually going on with a patient, and then we are able to make a pattern diagnosis that may be consist of a group of symptoms, right? For example, if you are having yang deficiency, right? You may experience like fatigue, cold hands and feet, and of course, spontaneous sweating, and of course, a lot of urination, maybe even diarrhea. But of course, you may just show up in one small symptom of that, and that is called as the pattern diagnosis. Okay? Now, going to the characteristics of the traditional Chinese medicine. The first very philosophy of the characteristic or the unique aspect of traditional Chinese medicine going to be the holism philosophy or holistic perspective. Okay? We think that human being is an organic whole. Okay? It cannot be interpreted or be discussed or even be separated into smaller pieces or smaller puzzles. Okay? Human is born to earth, while its life or the life is connected to heaven via qi. Sorry. Qi from heaven and earth combine together, and thus human is made. This is actually the first quote from the very first traditional Chinese medicine classic, or writings or script in ancient China called Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic, 黄帝内经. Okay? And of course, we heavily focus on the local and the whole, or the whole organism is connected in a dialectical view. Okay? That means one areas of change in your body will be reflecting to the whole body's wellness. You're having headache, maybe it's a sign for certain part of your body or the organs giving you a warning, hey, you need to rest. Hey, you need to get yourself out of this, toxic or very stressful working environment. You need to take actions. Okay? That is what your body is telling you. From smaller things, we need to see the bigger picture. Okay? And of course, traditional Chinese medicine also heavily focus on the harmony or the connection between human and nature. You have to be aware of the seasonal change. When it's winter, of course, you'll wear more layers. When it's summer, of course, you'll wear t-shirt and shorts, right? That's common sense. But of course, we also heavily focusing on the day and night. When it's daytime, it's supposed to be that you get up early when the sun rises, and of course you work, and of course you function, do life activities, and you rest at night when there's no sunlight or when there's no sun, right? You have to take care of yourself following the nature's rhythm or nature's rules. Okay? And also we heavily focus on the geographical locations influence to different people. For example, if you open up your Google and of course Google Vancouver and British Columbia, and you will know Vancouver is actually located in the west coast of Canada, and it's sharing a very oceanic climate. Okay? When the warm wind breeze actually come from the Pacific, Ocean, air is very moist, and of course the people in Vancouver, the city, will oftentimes experience like symptoms like sluggish body in the morning or even tiredness or fatigue. But instead, if you find a place in maybe a desert area, like in Phoenix City or like Salt Spring, right? Salt Spring City in the States, where it's very dry climate, and you may experience or you may observe that people will show up symptoms with like irritability, like thirstiness, with like drier skin, with these kind of like loss of sleep, more of these symptoms, right? More about heat. So that is a heavy focus on geographical location as well. And then, of course, there are some other connections between human and nature or human and the surrounding environment. For example, when in colder places, you want to use warming method or warming herbal formulas for the patient. But in the hotter places, you want to use more of a clearing, fire, or heat purging tonics. Okay? That's going to be the heavy focus or the characteristic of the traditional Chinese medicine on the human and nature's connection intake. Okay? Now, for the pattern diagnosis, this is also a very key important area for or in the traditional Chinese medicine. It of course uses dialectical view to help making the diagnosis for pathological change of the human body, but it is actually done through the 4 different data collecting ways. Okay, observation, smelling or listening, inquiry, and pause taking. Okay, allopathic medicine or Western medicine actually show a very similar system. When you're admitted to the hospital, when you are actually seeing your family physician or family doctor, right? What's the first thing they do? They ask, right? Inquire, like, why are you here today? Like, how can I help, right? What brought you in today? And you may just start to explaining, doctor, I have headache. Doctor, I have dry eyes. Doctor, I'm getting very thirsty recently. I'm not sure what's going on, right? And then doctor gonna be, okay. Gonna be listening, gonna be like, using a stethoscope, listen to your heartbeat, to listen to your lungs, and of course to observe your facial color, any of the coloration change of your skin. Maybe it's eczema or rash, right? All these things. And then Western medicine doctors or medical doctors gonna take your vitals, right? Take your blood pressure, and of course may even order some test for like blood sugar, like cholesterol level, or even say other like urine sample test for certain disease or conditions, right? But for traditional Chinese medicine, we actually use a traditional method called pause taking. We take your pause to feel the different quality, the rhythm, the position of your pause, and then we're able to get a complete view of your internal organ systems and of course internal patterns, or even like what's going on with you in your life recently, right? And of course, when enough information is collected, professionals of traditional Chinese medicine or practitioners can make pattern diagnosis. A very interesting thing is that in Western or allopathic medicine, medical doctors actually just make, symptomatic diagnosis where they tell you what's going on with your symptom, right? You have a headache, okay, it's a cluster headache, something like that, right? But in traditional Chinese medicine, we actually need to do a pattern diagnosis because we could have similar pattern diagnosis. For example, maybe spleen yang deficiency, right? But patient gonna show up in different symptoms. Okay. For example, patient may show up with like edema in the feet, or maybe like loss of appetite, or even like diarrhea, right? So the treatment method can also vary. Maybe sometimes we'll also have the patient coming for like a different pattern diagnosis, like say spleen yang deficiency and also kidney yang deficiency, right? They're focusing on different organs, but they may show up similar symptoms, like both may have diarrhea, right? Or both may have edema or water retention, or their feet get swollen, right? The treatment method, of course, may be the same for different pattern diagnosis. Okay, that is a very special characteristic for traditional Chinese medicine. And now that should be everything for this first ever video of this educational series. And again, I'll be your host and instructor Neil. Feel free to subscribe to this channel if you want more educational videos in the future. Make sure you open up the notification bell, right? And of course, please leave a comment if you find any of the content very interesting or very confusing. I will try my best to reply to any of the questions, and I will see you in the next one. Okay, I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye.